Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast and in the Midwest. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast, like myself. We will get started in just a few moments. Please grab some water, get comfortable, and get ready for the transformative discussion.
Hi, Dominique. Can you hear me? This is Tony.
I can't hear you, Tony. I'm looking at the session details. How you doing?
Doing good. Everyone who is online, today is Dominique's birthday. So happy birthday, Dominique.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. I just want to make sure we're all set. And so it looks like we're getting more people to come on in and y'all will start shortly.
I'm waiting for, I see that Vivienne is joined. I'm looking at the description. It looks a little different. Is that accurate?
No, back to what we had before and what we talked about. I don't know if they worded it a little bit differently, but it's exactly what you have. So.
Excellent. And Vivienne, I would love to see, there you are. Awesome. Okay. Are you ready for us to get started? We can get kicked off.
Whenever we're ready to go, let's do it.
Excellent. First of all, I want to say hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again. My name is Dominique Hollins. I use pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm super excited to be here today. I have the privilege and the honor to be here with the self-proclaimed mad scientist, Vivienne Ming, to discuss equity in the LGBTQ community during COVID-19. Before we get started, I have a few notes and shout outs that I'd like to provide. First, I would like to say thank you so much to Bank of America Merrill Lynch for sponsoring what we hope to be a transformative session. It's this type of support from corporations that help us to further our missions towards collective prosperity through the LGBTQ community. For everyone who has decided to join us today, I have a few house rules in order to maximize this experience for all of us. First, please stay muted unless called upon to create a seamless listening experience for everyone. Please hold questions till the end. We'll use the chat box, but closer towards the end in case we answer your question during the conversation, and it also helps us to better track those questions. Towards the end, if you do have a question, we ask that you use the upper right-hand corner of your screen. There's a little hand function. That's where you'll raise your hand. And then also, we want to let you know that if there is, for whatever reason, in the background in your space, we may have to disconnect you, but we're just giving you a heads up. And then lastly, this is a safe space. We're wanting to make sure that everyone is mindful and respectful of each other as you engage in the dialogue. That being said, I just want to take a moment to honor that this is Transgender Day of Remembrance. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the 36 members of the transgender community that have passed away or been killed in the US this year, and the more than 350 globally that we can track that have that did not make it through this year. So just a few moments, about 10 seconds of silence for them. All right, so without further ado, now, Vivienne Ming, the guest of honor. Before we get into the fancy talk of all the work that you've done, please let the world know what you want them to know about you. Who are we speaking to? And before we get into the work you've done, what would you like us to know?
Oh, my goodness. About me, I would assume that the best thing to know about me is as little as possible. But, you know, I treasure the work that I do myself. I take it with a grain of salt. In fact, my role in music for stage, wherever we pretend like royalties don't matter, is You Haven't Done Nothing by Stevie Wonder. To just be reminded, whatever I've done in my life, I can be proud of it. But, you know, there are still people that died this year. whether it's in our community or they died of a suicide or diabetes or anything else that any one of us could have made a difference in their lives on. There's always something more that you can do. So it's good to be reminded of that. And Stevie's the one who always gives it to me. Plus a little doo-wop from the Jackson 5. Probably most people don't know that song because it's super old, just like me.
I know the song, and so I love it. So thank you.
Absolutely. You've never heard of me before. I used to be a neuroscientist, and then I started a whole bunch of companies, which involved VCs taking one look at me and saying, hell no. And me starting the companies anyways. And nowadays they call me and say, hey, you got anything to invest in? And I get to say, well, you can probably guess. And I guess what I get to do right now, which is part of what we're going to talk about, is, by the way, I just started another company in the middle of COVID because I'm an idiot. But my main focus of my time is this place called Socos Labs. And it's this crazy idea of a startup as an experiment itself. And the experiment is, if you just do good things for people without asking for anything in return, your life will be better. I've got all sorts of research showing that that's true, but there's one thing to have a bunch of numbers, and there's another thing to believe it so much that people can bring us problems. And we're going to talk about one of them I've been working on recently today. And if I think my team and I can make a meaningful difference, and this has got to be about people. I really could care less about your blockchain company or your Uber for rabbits or whatever idea you've got to become an IPO billionaire. Good for you. It's hard starting a business. But what I really care about is, will this make people's lives better? And if it will, I'll pay for everything. And my team and I try and come up with a solution. We don't work for anyone. We're not consultants. We just work for the problem. And if it actually does something, then we give it away. So it is the worst startup idea that anyone has ever had. It turns out the whole making money part is actually a crucial ingredient, which I've never really gotten a hold of. But, I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years now. Every year we get to work on more projects. I've got more people that are part of the team. And we even get to collaborate with startups in a variety of domains, particularly neurotechnologies. But that's it. And Dr. Ming, my daughter, has 500 seizures a day. Please save her life. Or our company can't retain Black women. Help us price the cost of our bad promotions so that we can argue it to the board. If I think I can make a difference, then we try. And I try and, as much as it sometimes feels good, again, to pat yourself on the back, I try to take myself out of it and really think hard. If I can't make a difference on this, if I don't understand it, because that's the starting point. I do a lot of machine learning, a lot of fancy economic modeling. But in the end, if I don't understand the problem on the ground, I know that we cannot succeed.
I want you all to make note that essentially Vivienne is doing science for good and profitability is an afterthought. What a concept. And Vivienne, hopefully you are paying attention to, well, if you're not looking at the chat, there are folks who would love to connect with you. This is fantastic, and it's going to add to the rest of our discussion today. So thank you for that quite phenomenal intro, despite your humility. Let's just call it that. So how about this? According to the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, the LGBTQ community generates 1.3 trillion to the U.S. economy as of today. We hire about 33,000 employees, and we also generate revenue of about 2.4 million. And yet continue to still fight to prove the business case for providing equity to the LGBTQ community. So that being said, and in addition to all the other trends, and just to say, in light of COVID, let's just note that the HRC says the LGBTQ community wasn't even tracked for COVID until June. So 5 months of data has passed. Well, we became, again, an afterthought. Maybe that was in celebration of Pride. But as you can see, there's this continuum of waiting to address our needs as a collective. So with that said, can you talk about the StartOut Pride Economic Impact Index and why you chose to do this among all the other things you could be doing with your time?
Yeah. What a celebration of Pride. The bring out the dead guy comes wandering through the Castro. Or I guess As we say, it's the Trader Joe's in Oakland is where the lesbians hang out. So it's frustrating to see those numbers and to always get asked again and again and again.
Yes.
And here's the funny thing. If you're asking those questions, one, you're either phenomenally lazy or you already know the answer to it, because these answers have been around long before I really got involved. I really wanted to understand how banks work at one point. So I joined the advisory board for Credit Suisse, big, giant Swiss bank. There were some amazing people on that board, and it was a blast getting to know them and then obviously give some advice to the bank. But during that time, one of the things released was the effect of having women on boards. And the effect was really clear. Looking at data literally around the world for public companies, one single woman on the board increased returns to shareholders by 3%. Having 3 or more women on the board increased it by 5%. And you could break it up. You could just say, what about Asia Pacific? What about just Africa? No, it was true everywhere. And that's just one ingredient. We could look at, here's one of my favorite papers, really, of the last 10 years. If I cite it, by the way, I always say it's my favorite paper, but this one really is. Actually, I got to tell you, my favorite paper recently just came out in the Proceedings National Academy of Science. It is a social network analysis of the social graph of Songs of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones novels. Got published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and it turns out their claim. I mean, I'm a sci-fi fan. Plus, I do computational social science analysis. Plus, I do machine learning. Like, this thing allowed me to geek out in all sorts of ways. But that's not what I'm talking about. There's a group at Stanford that analyzed science. They just said, what if we build an AI and it read every scientific paper ever? Or, let's focus on recent years. Does it matter who the authors are, right? It's not supposed to matter, right? That is what we tell ourselves as scientists. And I'll tell you, of course, that's what VCs tell themselves as investors. It's what entrepreneurs often like to tell themselves about their local community. It's not me. I'm the channel by which good thing is going to come into the world. But we literally are trained for that purpose in science. Prove yourself wrong. That is the greatest contribution science has made to the whole world, is the idea that the world is understandable, but the only way you can achieve that understanding is to try and prove yourself wrong. It is the core of what has made the world great, I think, over the last 200 years. I am all over the place, but this paper looked at two things. An AI read all of these papers, and it said, which are the most novel? Which are doing the work of science the most, bringing new ideas into the world and proving that they are true or that they're not? And then the other was, and then do other scientists cite it? And their variable that they were focusing on was the diversity of the authors. And what they found was the more women who were authors, the more people from traditionally excluded backgrounds, traditionally excluded in academia, that were authors. So looking at race, looking at gender. And I know sometimes if you're a very macho, white, gay guy, we all kind of think you got it good. But even in cases like that, I've been able to extend the research. There are measurable costs. So they looked at this and they found that as the diversity of the authorship of papers increased, ideas became more novel, the papers became more creative, their contributions to science were bigger. And unfortunately, the more the diversity of the authorship increased, the fewer existing scientists cited it in their work. So you did everything you were supposed to, and yet the credit goes to someone else. Now, that's not a novel story, but to see it done, again, I love this with artificial intelligence, to look across all of science is so powerful. And to understand that we can see ourselves as being taken out of the process where we are intelligent people. No one is the villain in their story. And in fact, I genuinely believe there are very few villains in the world. One of them happens to be filing a bunch of frivolous court cases right now. But apart from that, there are very few villains in the world. There's just a lot of people that are human, really messily human, resistantly human. When we fail is when we refuse to admit that we're human, when we refuse to admit that we failed and try to be better. And I think this paper is the perfect testament to that. And I truly wanted to understand what this paper meant to the entrepreneurial community, particularly queer entrepreneurs.
So based on the scientific research, based on your analysis of how scientific research became essentially more innovative and creative in the scientific community, we found that they were not cited as much. And as a parallel, you did the index to say, well, what's happening in the equity realm? Are we seeing similar trends? Is that correct?
Absolutely. So, I was as an academic, and then my wife and I had this idea to take some machine learning I was working on, that little bit of machine learning, and dip it in her education research. So she got some peanut butter in my chocolate and some chocolate in my peanut butter. And if you're too young to get the joke, fuck you. So we mashed up our expertise. And Coke can bleep that, surely. We had this thing. This was before Coursera, before Khan Academy. Everybody loved it. The Department of Education, not the current one to be sure, but the Department of Education back then invited us in to give a talk. In fact, even ACT and the College Board, the people that do the standardized tests, they wanted to understand how AI could end testing. That was how much people loved the technology. And then the VCs patted me on the head and said, you're so cute. This is lovely.
Great.
What if we did fraud detection and I get to pick the CEO? By the way, I was the CEO and I was sitting right across the table from them. So I had that experience where I was dismissed. But we pushed through and we created a company. Unfortunately, it didn't get to be in education because just nobody would fund it there. But I know now in retrospect, we had an amazing company idea. Just no one could see it because they couldn't see past us. I bet if we'd come with a handbag company, they'd have funded it. Women know handbags. They don't know technology. Ironic that they loved the technology. So we were able to build something. And all the years since, I've built 6 companies. I've been the chief scientist at 2 others. I've had my impact. And I wanted to do 2 things. I wanted to create a tool people could use that, one, would share the stories of success. Because people in our community are creating companies. They're creating jobs. They're discovering intellectual property, patents, scientific discoveries, sharing it with the world. And they're earning funding and having exits. They're making a difference in the world. And if someone's going to create a job in your community, why would you ever say no? If your own sons, daughters, we don't have a very gender inclusive term for our children at this point, but the whole spectrum in between, I've been there. Why would we ever say no to when our neighbors want to make our lives better? But of course, we say it all the time. So we created this thing, the Inclusion Impact Index. We launched it specifically jointly with StartOut as the StartOut Pride Economic Impact Index. And what it does is it allows you to see just what I said, the story of how jobs are being created in San Francisco, about how patents are being generated in Boston. Every major metro in the US, about 95 of them passed threshold. They had at least 50 what we decided were entrepreneurs, high growth. I'm not talking mom and pop shops. I don't mean to dismiss them, but who's out, within a year creating a massive new jobs? It is those high growth entrepreneurs. And so we really wanted to use them as a canary in the coal mine to understand how a community is doing. So you can see those stories. But we wanted to go one big step further. We wanted to tell the story of about a world that could have been. A world that could have been had Boston been performing for queer entrepreneurs as well as the 3 best cities, not just a magical world, where we pretend everyone is exactly the same, but simply looking at what already exists. What are the 3 cities that best perform for women for job creation? And what if, using some machine learning, every other city could just hit that modest goal? And what we found, for example, for queer entrepreneurs is very much like you were leading in here, that not only were billions of dollars being created, but even more money was being left behind because of lost potential, because of people like me that didn't get the funding they should have and had to put effort into proving themselves rather than bringing their ideas to light. So you can go visit this. Actually, right now at StartOut.org, you can see it. It's just a free tool that we've put out there so that people can make a difference. And I got 2 big other things I want to inject, but I need to shut the hell up and get asked questions.
I love your brain. We'll have questions in a few moments. I have another question for you. You said for, let's just say, billion, the community metric for those.
Yeah. So, we've got 2 different big questions. How much is missing? I don't mean lost. I mean, how many jobs do we think probably were created by queer entrepreneurs in Dallas who felt they couldn't be out? They couldn't be counted. Mm-hmm. And also, how much more could have been generated by those people that were out, or everyone, literally just the missing jobs. And, we also launched a parallel project looking at female entrepreneurs. We will very soon be doing Black entrepreneurs, same mission, and then looking at the intersectionality across all of them. Yes, we want to do it all.
I was going to ask that question. So glad.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're being lazy, step by step. When I launched my first company, someone said to me, if you're not embarrassed by your product, you waited too long to launch. So I always launch when I'm still embarrassed. It's not about me. So I'm still embarrassed. I think this thing is beautiful. I love what my team put together, but there's so many things. It's going to take forever to get every little thing in. So if you're sitting, if you've got a couple $1 million burning a hole in your pocket, give me a call. Normally I don't ask for money, but this is something that I think you may want to put your name on.
I also think this will be money quite well spent based on the research that you've done. And because I know that we do have questions, Vivienne, do you mind if I hop in and ask you a question really quick? Finish your point.
Absolutely, go for it. The point I was going to make is when we look, for example, at Boston, we found 6 openly queer entrepreneurs in Boston. Doesn't mean that there aren't others, but we were able to identify 6. We didn't want to name people. We don't name anyone, but we didn't even want to include their data unless they affirmatively included that data. And so we actually look at that, and it is an order of magnitude more jobs that we believe. We've tracked something about 30,000 jobs created by queer entrepreneurs in Boston, but we actually think it's closer to 240,000 jobs actually created for their community. Doesn't matter whether you accept queer people or not, they made that job and your nephew has it. Be proud. So the other side is what's left on the table. And we look at a city like San Francisco, where we actually have a pretty good count of queer entrepreneurship, and we still see literally tens of billions of dollars in funding and exits left on the table, literally thousands of patents. Someone just like us on this call can make a difference for COVID-19, for my son's diabetes, for Alzheimer's, but they didn't get the chance. And again, we're talking, let's be honest, we're talking some fairly highly educated, affluent Americans. Imagine when we get the chance to take this around the world and measure what gets left behind when you being you means you truly have to hide. It's not just approval, it's life or death. And I guess, as we already covered with the Day of Remembrance, for many of us, it is life or death. And the person you could have given to the rest of America just never had the chance. So that's important. So we're literally talking just from our tiny slice of America about tens of billions of dollars that should exist and doesn't.
And that's just one community, because as you do your intersectional work, that number will be multiplied. You have a number of folks from the UK that are desperately asking you to come over and please do more research there. So I think this is incredible, because I'm in love with people's minds when they can push us beyond. I think everyone is capable in various capacities. We don't get the opportunity. You essentially created another tool to prove a point our community already knows, right? So I love the data, but the question is, how many times do we have to slice this to make the point? So can you talk about how why this index is different? And I was reading the site. You built it for municipalities, investors, ecosystem builders, grantors, and other decision makers. Why now are they like, oh great, another tool to prove something we probably already know but have chosen not to do?
And the chosen not to do thing is hard. Actually, there was just a paper. I like citing papers. There was just a paper came out recently showing, unfortunately, when you look at social good organizations, when we're talking nonprofits, government, your local school board, unfortunately, what we contribute our capital to, whether it's our social capital, our human capital, our money through donations, if it doesn't affect us directly, there is unfortunately virtually no correlation to whom we give money to, what we support, and the actual outcomes. So here is the next big thing for the index, and it is the reason we built it for policymakers, policy and programs, whatever it might be. You are a local entrepreneur and you want to understand your community all the way up. What should Joe Biden, the next president of the United States, actually do? And we wanted to build a system that would allow them to actually measure their impact on the world. So the next big step for us is we're going to take the index. It already exists. You can already use it. We just want to make it even easier to really test whether your projects are making a difference, because it is so hard. When you run an access to capital program in the Midwest for trans women of color, how do you know it is true? Other than how many people show up, how do you know that it's truly affecting their lives? In fact, the Nobel Prize in Economics 2 years ago was to Esther Dofu and her husband. He doesn't need a name. And that is exactly what they do. They run these massive economic studies of what actually makes a difference in people's lives. I wanted this to be that same tool. You want to know whether your accelerator is actually changing your local community. You want to know that the programs that your nonprofit is running or that you are donating to is making a difference. We wanted to be able to measure and actually create a tool that it not only would tell stories, but again, I am a total damn nerd. I wanted to create something that would allow people to know that they were making a difference, which includes the other side, to never let people get away with saying, yeah, we tried that stuff and it didn't work. No, we don't want anyone to be able to get away from that anymore.
I think that's fantastic, because you said if they're not connected to it, then they're essentially unwilling to act. And we have been talking about empathy and understanding people's perspectives. When people ask what I do in DEI, I said I teach people how to be human. And what you're doing is connecting facts to the actions that our corporations, investors, municipalities claim they're invested in. So for anyone who is listening, if you are really trying to put your money where your mouth is and track your efficacy, this is an excellent tool to do so. That being said, Vivienne, are there any trends that you are seeing in light of COVID-19? So let's be aware of the previously existing conditions of homophobia and sexism and discrimination and all the things that have already hurt the LGBTQ community. We're assuming it's going to get worse by nature of COVID. Is this being reflected in the index?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to mash in some additional research that we've done, because I've had the chance to build some COVID models. I got to build a predictive model for super spreaders, who is likely to become one. I got to work on a model to process new, which by the way, could be used also to decide who first should get the new vaccines that are being developed. Elder care workers. Go out there, find those people that got to work 3 jobs to pay their rent. And if you're taking care of our parents, then those 3 jobs are going to be taking care of someone else's parents at the same time. They are the biggest threat to spreading, and they got no choice. Give them a break. In fact, for that matter, pay them 10 times as much as they're getting right now, so they don't have to work 3 jobs. But that's an aside.
But it helps with prioritization. It helps with prioritization to determine if we're going to use this data, here's where you start.
Absolutely. Where's the biggest impact? That's what it's, I mean, I hate to put it in so grotesque terms, but what's the ROI? Not just economic. What's the human ROI on all of these programs that we want to run? How many lives, how many years of education, how many new discoveries, how many new jobs? Like, those are things that I want to know the answer to. Because unfortunately, not just the people that say, I get the research, but I don't really care. There are a lot of us that care a lot, but end up becoming interested in things that messy human problems, messy human solutions, and people don't usually like dealing with complexity. So that aside, what are the trends that we're seeing? We see 2 big ones. One is a lot of people tell a story about how entrepreneurship is counter-cyclical. This means when there are economic downturns, investors go towards startups, high-risk investment, to try and get some returns. It's a time for new ideas to break out into the world, is the way it goes. So it turns out we're not seeing that with very early stage investments. So if this is your first time out, you got a cool new idea no one's ever heard of before, it is a tough time to raise money right now. Later stage, proven entrepreneurs, much easier. First time. Well, who's more likely to be a first time entrepreneur than someone, there's no one like you that you've ever seen being an entrepreneur before. You look different, you act different. You just don't look like a Hollywood's idea of a nerd tycoon. And how do you break through that? How many people that are just a little bit different than that stereotype put in just as much effort, but never break through that first time, and therefore there's never a second time? So we're in one of those moments where there's a total, not a total lockdown, but a real tightening up of that first time funding. And that is disproportionately hurting people that are different. And yes, queer communities, absolutely, Black entrepreneurs, many female entrepreneurs. And in fact, this parallels something we see inside large companies as well, which is we're talking to each other through these cameras. It has been a lifeline. God knows what it would have been like in 1919 to be in a global pandemic and to know that the only way to meet anyone was to risk something. Having said that, though, and I'm really just using this as a very loose analogy as someone whose family has deep experience with autism, but it's like all of us are a little bit autistic now. All of our shared attention and gaze tracking is gone. All of our mannerisms are muted. We have differential quality. Some of us are able to afford a super high-end business connection, and others are in neighborhoods where it doesn't matter what we spend, best access we get. Well, guess what? Our brains take all of that data and they say that there's something wrong. And that wrongness it drives in-group. You want to spend time. You may not be aware of it, but it's affecting all of us. You want to spend time with people that are similar to you. And it drives negative feelings for out-group. Now, in-group and out-group can be complicated. For me, Jesus, I don't want to spend time with a bunch of people that look like me. Christ, you see this face. Why would anyone? My wife also says, don't worry, Vivienne, I love you for your mind. I know what she means. But in this case, it's really pernicious. These are subtle things. You can even know what's happening, but if someone's got a janky connection, just because they live in a neighborhood that Comcast ignored and is just waiting to come around for another sweep, well, until that gets fixed, we actually think less of their quality of work, even though we know in our head that's not what's going on. So this connection, the downturn in the economy, these are all disproportionately affecting people that are outside of what America, if you don't look like you belong in a, MAGA rally, then you probably got a good guess of who's getting hurt most by this.
And this is a time for risk evaluation. What we basically took from that is VCs already have to evaluate risk. They typically do not do it in favor of people they don't know. They typically do not surround themselves with people they don't know. People of color and members of the LGBTQ communities don't get that opportunity. And what the index has revealed is that it's true. The funds are tightening up and it's not in our favor. So to anyone who is listening today and you have access to influencing where those funds are being distributed, this index, first of all, proves a point we already know. But if you really want to refine that strategy and hone in on which markets or what segments can we focus on for your business, and now is the time, we ask that you not restrict that opportunity to this community because it's already difficult. So we have about 10 minutes left. We can certainly talk about this in many topics and all the interrelated topics for quite some time. But I do want to give some time for those who did submit questions to ask a question or two for you to answer. And I did receive some. If you are still with us and you're in the chat room, can you do me a favor and raise your hand? I see some folks who have questions, but I'm not sure if they are still in the meeting. So if you have a question, Daisy, give me just a moment. Daisy, feel free to unmute. I saw your hand raised, and I've been encouraged not to have you do that, but I'll ask for forgiveness later. Daisy, share your question, please.
Hi, Dominique, and hi, Vivienne. Thank you so much. I'm over in the UK, and I run a company that looks at amplifying minoritized voices, and we kind of operate at the intersection of creativity and belonging. And what we're really hoping to do is research deeply into how creative storytelling breeds self-expression, visibility, and how that in turn increases belonging and empathy. And I wondered whether, in amongst all of your findings, whether you'd come across data that speaks to that, and just your instinctual sort of response to those thoughts.
Okay, so my answer to that is probably going to take 7 to 8 hours. I've got so much stuff. Yeah, I'll try and give the very quick version here. When I was a grad student, my advisor told me what his advisor had told him before him. Science is a story, and that story should be about an hour long. But that science is a story is more than just you should give a good talk when you're talking about your research. It is that your job as a scientist is to understand the story that brings all of the research, even the ones you don't believe, you disagree with, together in one understanding so that it can have an impact on the world. And I've taken that with me into entrepreneurship and my social work to try and understand the power of stories. And I think the most potent, God, I have so little time. Let me give you 2 quick examples. One of my own research. I got a poster downstairs, like the posters behind me. It is the title of a project I did. You can read about it at Socos.org. The title of that project is Represent, and it gets into the power of representation. You want to know what the single biggest predictor of wage gap across countries in the UK, in the US, in the EU, China, doesn't matter. The biggest predictor is the number of female faces on the leadership team. I built a whole bunch of AIs. I turned them loose through the data of 60,000 companies around the world. And we found there were all sorts of reasons why gender wage gap exists. But the thing that changed it, the thing that truly reversed that gap as much as anything else, more than anything else, was seeing someone like you in a leadership position in your company. Women made different choices. They've invested more of themselves in their companies when they had the evidence that that would pay off. Effectively, it was a story. We see this with young kids of color turning down admissions to elite universities, not because they're not qualified. They're amazingly qualified. But the number one predictor of them accepting those or applying in the first place, someone from their neighborhood went before them. We even see it in similar phenomenon with caste in India. And, when I was growing up, there were no trans people, not in positions of leadership. You were a best case scenario, you were a punchline in a sitcom. Worst case scenario, you're a pervert that's a danger to America. So, how do you ever believe you can make a difference if you don't have that story? And I know I'm going long, but one last, because I like citing papers. Other than my own research, which you can read up on, there was just a paper that came out that found, in fact, pro-social stories during the earlier eras in Europe. Pro-social stories preceded greater social inclusion in Europe. So in other words, people were telling stories about being good to one another and being accepting, and that turned into Europe accepting that something beyond class, something beyond gender, and even beyond race. So, we can go from historical analysis of the power of stories to literally the power of a life story to change an individual person's choices. That data is there.
Yep. And this, to summarize that, I would say you can't be what you can't see. And now we're moving.
Yes.
I mean, and that's very pivotal. Until you know that it exists, how would you know that it is available to you? Which is why representation is essential. We have time for one more question from Jessica, who has kindly raised her hand. So Jessica, feel free to unmute. You've been with us this whole time. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So I'm a trans founder in the Midwest, and we've got a new medical device that literally can help save 60,000 lives every year here in the United States alone. There's been an opportunity cost that I've had to pay because I've got to knock on 10x more doors to get anything done than the average straight white guy. So I was curious, would your data set help me enumerate that and be able to, cite that as a source and say, hey, look, guys, you're costing lives by not hearing what I have to say?
So you can absolutely use the index and our other research on these questions. I will share, however, having done this for a while, it is really hard to find trans founders for a public exercise like this for a very simple reason. The very one that you're noting that I experienced my first time as an entrepreneur, which is, not to knock every straight white guy in the world that ever went to Stanford, I used to be one of you, but we do not fit their pattern recognition for a successful entrepreneur. And it's not just that. I have never pitched a female VC in my entire career. I raised a lot of money. I founded a bunch of companies, and yet no woman of any kind has ever had voting rights on whether my company gets funded or not, which is truly atrocious. Forget gender transition. So yeah, we have data, but I will freely acknowledge it is hard to come by the very precise data of the experiences that, you and I have had out there trying to raise money. And God, at least I'm in Berkeley. It's my family comes from Kansas. So there are things I love about the Midwest, but it can be really challenging to be different. And the thing I can say is, yes, you can absolutely go in and see things like patent creation rates and turn those into insights and make arguments. But often that's really challenging to change one person's mind when their patterns aren't fitting you. So here's another piece of advice that actually emerges out of my research, which is break the pattern. This may sound a little perverse, but when we talk about being authentic, and not to intentionally be too challenging here, but not my favorite word, just because so many words get overused and sometimes lose a little of their meaning. But the more you get to be you, and that it takes courage, it's hard. Who knew you had to practice to be human? But you do. If you don't practice courage, you will not be courageous at the right moment. And so what I have found in my research is, if you are a particular outsider, if you have really challenging characteristics, your best bet is to actually break the whole mode be a complete outlier. Now they're not looking at you in terms of how well you fit a pattern. They're looking at you in a completely different way.
Yep.
Obviously, all my fancy degrees helped with me. And the irony is, so did my time being homeless. You know, suddenly I became this person whose unique individual story became a value add to the whole investment opportunity. And, you know, it may sound like, God, you know, using your own story to do these things. But when society's left you out, that is one of the most powerful ways that you can break back in, is make it personal, make it deeply personal. And we do see that trend emerge in our data. And of course, I've experienced it myself. So lean into being different. Yes, genuinely as a call to authenticity, but lean into being different, because it turns out it is actually a demonstrable way to break through people's stereotypes.
Yep. And what I would add to that, Jessica, is show it in data. Show parallel industries that you work in to say, this is what happened when there was a breakthrough. It took us 25 years and we could have did it 15 years ago. We are again in the midst of another scenario. So show them the possibility, show them 3 other times when they failed to act, and then show them the risk of not acting. You go from like trying to sell them on doing the right thing to selling them on a loss. I had VCs tell me there are 2 things we care about, and all of them are white who told me this. It was completely different conversations. They said we care about greed and fear. We either want to maximize the opportunity as soon as possible, or there's FOMO, fear of missing out. So if you find that greed is not their cup of tea, pivot to fear and scare the hell out of them. I mean that respectfully. All right, so I want to say thank you, Jessica, for your question. Thank you so much, Vivienne, for your brain, for your research. Again, anyone who is looking to partner or help with funding, please connect with Socos Labs and Vivienne and the work that she's doing there. If you have access to influence of any of the money that we're talking about in our LGBTQ community for entrepreneurs, now is the time to start cutting checks, or at least to start making the budget plan for 2021. With that being said, thank you all so much. It has been a pleasure. Vivienne, I honor the work that you do. Even as you continue to disparage your work, I celebrate you. Thank you to disparage yourself sometimes, but in a joking way, as I do. I'm also from Chicago, so I know what it's like to be from the Midwest. Thank you. I will see you in the closeout section. Excellent. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you so much. Just imagine Stevie is walking us out now.
Yes, he is. I can hear it. I can hear the music. Outro. Have a good one. Thank you, and see you in a few moments.
Yes.